Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Lane County Board of County Commissioners meeting for the afternoon of January 28th, 2020. We have Public Works next, item 10A, work session on the update of the City of Eugene Urban Reserves Planning Project with Lindsay Eichner, our senior planner. And if you would like to introduce your guests, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Chair Buck, Commissioners. Yes, so I'm Lindsay Eichner from Lane County Planning. With me today is Terry Harding, who's the principal planner at the City of Eugene, and Rebecca Gershow, who's the senior planner and project manager for this Urban Reserves project. We also have some of the rest of our project management team in the audience, all employees of the city. We have Sophie, Audrey, Heather, and Thea. They're waving from the audience. We're really excited to be presenting you with this update today on what we've been working on since last June, which is the last time we were before you. Today we'll be providing you updates on our suitability analysis, a public input process that we've had, and what the next steps moving forward are going to be. And we'll be back before you and City Council this spring for some requested action items. So no actions today, but later this spring. And I'm going to hand the presentation over to Rebecca.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Mm-hmm. Thanks for having us today. We are going to, they said they could hear me. We are going to give you an update of the work, as Lindsay said, that has been underway since the last time we were here in June, and give you a little preview of our next steps to try to set the stage for when we come back in the spring, when we're going to be asking you for your direction on urban reserves. So as you know, Urban Reserves is a joint project between City of Eugene and Lane County. We are planning for the next 2 generations as far out as 2062. What we're trying to do is identify the best areas for Eugene to grow into when it's needed. And there are pros and cons everywhere, as you will see with our analysis. We are looking for enough land for housing and jobs, as well as public lands like parks, schools, and utilities and services to serve that infrastructure. Urban reserves will remain rural until or unless they are brought into Eugene's urban growth boundary through a formal process of expansion. This is a diagram that we shared with folks at our recent public meetings. It just talks about, it was in response to questions that we got about the differences between urban reserves, the urban growth boundary, and the city limits. So what we're showing here is not the final urban reserves, obviously, but where we are in our analysis today. It shows very diagrammatically those areas that are potentially suitable for urban reserves. And that little pie chart that you can see represents in the future when there's a need to expand the UGB, we would evaluate and then bring in only those areas of the urban reserves that were needed, such as for housing or for jobs. So why are we doing this now? Well, we all know there is a housing supply and affordability crisis in our community, in our state. It's a very important issue. And urban reserves is one piece of that puzzle. We were directed by the City Council, and that was supported by the County Board of Commissioners back in 2015 to do this work and to prepare an urban reserves proposal for your consideration. So this work is aligned with the work of our growth monitoring program, which Heather O'Donnell is managing, and the City Council's direction for us to re-examine our UGB in 2021 if there is a need that is shown. The growth monitoring urban reserves relationship is shown in your packet under attachment E. This graph that's up here shows the additional 34,000 people that we projected during our 20-year UGB planning period that goes out to 2032. And then it shows an additional almost 49,000 people during the 30-year urban reserves planning period that goes out to 2062. It projects a 2062 population for Eugene of over 262,000 people. So we obviously can't do this alone. We obviously can't do it just with the staff in this room. The county is a key partner, and really more than that, the community members, the property owners are all county residents who we are working with here. We are working with utility and service providers that serve the area inside the urban growth boundary, but also coordinating with those folks in Lane County. And we have a variety of different volunteers, including a triple bottom line sounding board, where we have representation from a couple of different county committees. And we have a technical advisory committee that also has a county resident on it. So this is our outreach process and our timeline. It's also in your packet. It is attachment A. It's a little difficult to see up here because there's so many moving parts, but the project's major phases are shown in the middle, with the project committees, planning commission, council, and board of commissioners meetings on the bottom, and then public engagement opportunities are shown along the top. It includes a variety of different ways for the public to weigh in, including open houses, smaller area-specific meetings, and online engagement. The ETAC is that I mentioned previously, our technical advisory committee, is that those green circles, and they have met 14 times so far during the length of the project, evaluating our technical and suitability analysis. So there are these 5 main phases, or 4 main phases, and then the formal adoption process. We are at the end of the suitability analysis and at the beginning of the option development phase, where we are moving quickly. Our goal is for the City Council and the Board of Commissioners both to take action on a proposed urban reserves this spring. Following an agreed-upon urban reserve area, we will proceed with the formal adoption process with the goal of adoption by early 2021. We are 3 to 4 months behind our original goal due to the level of analysis, technical review, and public process that's been needed to move us forward. So this looks a little bit different than the last time you saw it. So this big dial I showed you before, but I think it's a good tool because it shows the amount of growth that's projected between 2032 and 2062 in a different way. It also shows the accompanying land needed based on our land need modeling work. So the state allows us to decide on the size of an urban reserves as long as it meets the needs of at least 10 and no more than 30 years of growth beyond the UGB. So that's why we're showing 2042 to 2062 here. How many years we plan for will affect both the size and location of our urban reserve. You'll hear me say a lot, a 30-year urban reserve. And so what that means is designating enough land to meet the needs of 30 years of growth beyond the UGB planning period out to 2062. And as you can see on here, this is equivalent to about 6,300 acres of land. These are very rolled up land need projections. They're approximate numbers, and they include that land that I mentioned for homes and schools and jobs and parks. They're based on these population projections that I showed you and on employment forecasts. The exact land need will depend on the actual land that is identified for urban reserves and its specific characteristics. So, because different land has different capacity, so that's why these are approximate numbers, and we'll get there in a minute. So this is our study area. This is similar to what we showed you last time, but it has changed a bit. So after identifying our land need, we started focusing on our land supply. We established an urban reserve study area based on state guidance back in spring, summer 2018. This black line is the UGB. The blue line is the Metro Plan boundary, and the red line is the study area boundary. And it included initially almost 26,000 acres. However, based on our suitability analysis, we didn't have enough developable land for a 30-year urban reserve option. We needed additional land to consider. So our study area was expanded west around Highway 126 and Fisher Road to include almost 27,000 acres of land to study. This decision to expand the study area was formalized last November, and about 130 property owners were notified in December. So this is our land supply analysis summary, and this is the map that includes that new Fisher Road sub-area. After setting the study area, we moved on to analyzing that land. And what we were looking for was what land was developable. So what land was potentially developable for urban reserves. So how we did that was by removing from our analysis protected, committed, and fully developed lands. So protected lands are lands that are described as either natural resources or natural hazards. So things like riparian areas and wetlands are natural resources. Things like floodway, floodplain, landslide risk areas, or prohibitively steep slopes are hazard areas. So we removed those areas for consideration for urban reserves, and we didn't consider them developable in general. Committed land is land that's committed for public uses mainly. Things like the airport, schools, LCC, parks and open spaces, mostly publicly owned property, but also cemeteries and land with conservation easements are included as committed land. And land, obviously, that is fully developed does not have development potential on it. So we categorized the land in this way, and the remaining land we identified as developable. It was categorized either as partially vacant or undeveloped. And once again, the land under consideration reduced to about 11,000 acres of developable land. We did an analysis to look at how many homes or jobs could potentially be accommodated on that land. for both residential and industrial needs. We're not designating land for urban reserves. We're just doing a general estimate to make sure that we are identifying enough land. It estimates the average total amount of capacity. So for residential, for example, we used average densities from inside the urban growth boundary and looked at factors such as slope, elevation, and parcel size to determine average capacities. So we did that. That was a very high-level summary of our technical analysis. Once we got to these 11,000 acres of developable land, we began our suitability analysis. And there's an outline of analysis that's included in your packet as directed by the state. They directed us, based on these urban reserves guidance, to look at these 4 criteria. For identifying whether this land that's developable is also suitable for urban reserves. So we developed these suitability criteria that had prompting questions under these 4 categories that looked at things like, could this land efficiently accommodate our needs? Could it provide for orderly and economic provision of public facilities and services? We did a very detailed service analysis with our service providers throughout the study area to meet criteria too. We looked at evaluating whether these areas had significant environmental, energy, economic, or social consequences, and whether these areas, if they were urbanized, would be compatible with nearby agricultural and forest activities. So we did this analysis. We broke down our study area into 18 sub-areas for evaluation purposes only, and then dismissed land that on balance would be unsuitable for urban reserves. So all of these detailed suitability analysis reports can be found on our website. They're broken down, like I said, by each sub-area. So we have detailed data and maps and our analysis for each of these areas if you're interested in finding out the details on any of these. So, like I said, we did this for our 18 sub-areas. We initially removed over half of the developable land as unsuitable for urban reserves. That's when we realized that we didn't have enough land for a 30-year option, and our understanding was that was part of the direction, was to bring back that 30-year option to decision makers. So that's when we determined to expand our study area and looked at the Fisher Road area because of its proximity to other suitable land and also its proximity to good transportation connections on Highway 126 and Fisher Road. So we ended up adding in additional suitable land in that new Fisher Road sub-area and in a few other sub-areas, and that got us to about 6,700 acres of land that is suitable for urban reserves. And that is about 400 acres more than we need for a 30-year option. So to give you a little bit more detail on some of the areas that we removed from further consideration, you can see on this map, the dashed line is the extent of the study area, and the darker colored areas are the areas that are still in for consideration, still considered suitable. The grayed out areas are those lands that we removed and didn't consider suitable for further consideration. So we removed the airport for obvious reasons, the airport sub-area. We're not going to recommend housing or jobs there. We removed the Beacon River Loop sub-area in its entirety, mostly because it was the majority within the 100-year floodplain. We removed most of the Airport South, Mackenzie, and Game Farm sub-areas, also because those sub-areas were mostly 100-year floodplain. You can see they're along the Mackenzie River and the Willamette and in the Amazon Creek floodplain. We also removed all of South Willamette, Fox Hollow, and Dillard sub-areas, generally due to steep slopes, high elevation, greater than average landslide risk and fire hazard areas, access issues, especially the Dillard sub-area with one very windy road in and out from the city, and difficulty to serve. Both of those sub-areas ranked as the most difficult and expensive to serve by our utility and service providers. And then more in general, the areas on the edge of our study area, you can see that there are a number of areas in the north and in the south of the study area that were removed from consideration, generally due to their distance from the UGB, their inaccessibility due to a lack of roads or difficulty in putting roads in due to terrain, difficulty to serve. In the south areas, specifically hazards such as steep slopes and landslide risk. I think that is all on that slide. That wasn't a very good close. So here's the close. So those are our suitability results. We took those results and we shared them with study area residents just in the last few weeks. The first 3 weeks of January, we went out to the northwest and south sides of the city and met with folks who live in the study area, who we sent postcard notification to, and we also advertised the meetings more generally. We had over 125 folks show up. You can see we did a presentation in the beginning and had some general Q&A, and then we had boards displayed around the room, and there was a lot of staff available to answer questions. So we had a lot of questions about people's specific properties. There was a lot of general confusion about the differences between urban reserves and the urban growth boundary. People have never heard of urban reserves before, especially folks who were in the Fisher Road sub-area. We had previously noticed study area residents. This would have been the third time for folks, but those folks had just gotten a couple of very recent notifications. So there was a lot of, what is this? Bringing people up to speed, general questions, some fear, a lot of really just trying to figure out what the project was and how urban reserves would impact them directly. So we had FAQs and a matrix that talked about the differences between being in the city and in the UGB, in urban reserves, in the county. We have all of our presentation and open house materials on our website, as well as we're collecting information that we got from folks and we're turning them into additional frequently asked questions so people can see and learn from the other folks at the meeting. Commissioner Bozovich was at our last meeting, so that was great. Planning Commissioner Leddick was at our first meeting, so that was wonderful. You guys outshone your city counterparts, so it was good to see you there. And we're also creating a online public meeting outlet that we are going to put up on our new engagement platform on our website later this week. It's called Engage Eugene. It gives you the opportunity to have people interact virtually who weren't able to come to a public meeting or who can't get out of their home easily. So we're going to have that way of getting additional input as well. At the same time, we're moving into the next phase of our work, which is the final phase of our work before we come back to you with a proposal, and that is developing options for you to consider. Once again, the way we do this is very structured by state law, and it's set up in order to preserve high-value farm and forest land. So the order in which we bring these suitable lands into urban reserves is first looking at those exception areas, so those areas that are already designated for residential, commercial, or industrial uses. And then we look at land with marginal value, so marginal value for resource use, which are called marginal lands. And then lastly, we look at our farm and forest lands, and we bring in those lands generally that have the highest quality soils last. So this is the final step of our analysis. We know that we are going to have to bring farm and forest lands into urban reserves because, as you can see from this map, that's mostly what is outside of the urban growth boundary. There's only about 1,200 acres of these exception areas and marginal lands. So the focus will be turning to our farm and forest resource lands and how we create urban reserve areas that work the best. So we're crafting options in the upcoming weeks and months, which we are going to be sharing with folks. It will include a 30-year option, which is the largest. We will need to remove approximately 400 acres of that suitable land, focusing on tax lots with the highest quality soils. We will be creating some other smaller urban reserve options for you, which would also need to be focused around removing highest class soils first from further consideration. So there's a little bit of wiggle room in this due to things like topography and serviceability, but the important thing to keep in mind that we can't just pick and choose at this point, that we're looking at a very sort of structured analysis. So that takes us to our next steps, which I just talked about a bit. So the other folks who are going to be reviewing our work are the ETAC, our Technical Advisory Committee. We also have a triple bottom line sounding board meeting where they will be reviewing our options. We'll be going back out to study area residents and getting more public input before we take our options and the options to the planning commissions for the city and the county for a recommendation. That might be a couple of meetings, and then coming back here and to city council, which also might be a couple of meetings for an action on a proposed urban reserves. At that point, we will be beginning our formal adoption process. When you tell us here, this is what we want, where we want it to go. This is what we want it to look like. We will be developing IGAs between the city and the county and the service providers in the urban reserves area. We'll be doing ordinance writing, code updates, and writing findings. And so we hope to begin hearings in the fall with a adopted urban reserve the following winter. I'm going to stop talking now and open it up for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. A couple of points and a couple of questions, but I'm going to start with a quote from Emily Jerome. No, not Emily. This is a quote. It said, "It won't be over until it's done. Some people can't get done fast enough. Others want increasing levels of data." The second quote is, "We're 2 to 3 months, 3 to 4 months behind because of the need for more data, more research, more analysis." That first quote was not too long after Envision Eugene began. We had the community resource group. You weren't here then. Heather, you were here. And Terry, you were here. Emily, I know you were here because I've got some of your quotes right here. But that quote that I just read was from October 14th, 2010. Coming up on 10 years ago. So, and it's not over, because we're still considering, during the last expansion, we decided to not expand Eugene's urban growth boundary for residential. We figured we had enough land inside the residential area. Other fact is the cost of housing is going up. It's not exponential, but it's dramatic. I'm happy because my house has gone like this since I bought it. But the people who would like to buy a new house aren't happy because the price of their first house is going up at the same rate. Now, the people who I list as not being happy are the roughly 1,100 kids who graduated from high school here in Eugene last year. So every year we have over 1,000 people who graduate from the high school, become adults, so to speak. Let's call that the adult point. We have different definitions of adult. So not everybody's going to look for a home. Not everybody's going to want a home. Some live with parents, some move out of town, some go to college, some get married, some room together. But a certain percentage of those folks always want to live here. And I'm looking at the numbers that we're projecting of in the next 40 years, about 50,000, 56,000, I think is the approximate growth between the next 10 and the next 30 years in Eugene. So in that 40 years, you know, something like 40,000 are going to graduate from high school alone. Now, do we believe that climate change is happening? Do we believe that? That's a rhetorical question. Different people have different answers to that question. But that being said, I know that people are moving here because it's not hot and dry, and it's not getting hotter and getting drier. So the numbers, the projections that we have, I think are suspect as far as the number of people who are going to be demanding places to live in the city of Eugene. And I'm not talking about Springfield. I'm not talking about Oak Ridge. I'm not talking about Cresswell or Coburg or Junction City, places close by. Just in the city of Eugene, we look at the numbers, they're pretty alarming, the numbers that are just going to move here through climate change, based upon statistics that are recited over and over again, and the people who are going to graduate from high school based on statistics that are not so easy to find. So this is not a question, it's just a statement. The demand for housing is going to go up, continue to go up. So the rates that we're seeing, the rates of unhoused people, marginally housed people, and people teaming up, couch surfing, whatever it may be, are on the increase. We know that. So the discussion that we have must be tempered by the fact that we have increasingly more people demanding, needing, and having a legitimate call for housing, houses, beds, front doors, security inside the city of Eugene, which is what we're talking about here. This is Eugene. It's not Springfield. It's not Lane County. This is Eugene. And I personally don't believe we're accommodating that. And based upon the fact that it gets more and more and more expensive just to buy a 4,200 square foot lot if you want to buy a new home, or to build a 40 unit or 100 unit apartment complex, if you look at the price per unit, it's getting more and more expensive. Consequently, people are paying, people who are trying to go to enjoy their first job, perhaps out of college, paying $1,200 to $1,400 a month for an apartment. And none of that's going into equity. All of that's going into, that's down the hole, that goes along with all the other debt that they've accumulated. So now this, I'm not asking you a question, I'm just making a statement. This is what we have to consider when we're looking at urban reserve, when we're looking at urban growth boundaries, and when we're looking at, do we want people to live in what has been established as the metropolitan core of the Lane County, or do we want Junction City to get bigger? Do we want Cottage Grove to continue to get bigger? Do we want the outlying communities to grow in towards Eugene? Now, how far is it from Eugene to Junction City?
To the Junction City UGB, from the Eugene UGB to the Junction City
Let's say
UGB, it's
city
less than a mile.
Yeah, and city limits even, Junction City, so it's less than a mile. Now, what was it when we started Envision Eugene? How far was it from Junction City to Eugene? It was, I think, 9 or maybe even 11 miles. Well, now it's 1 mile. Fact. So that's the kind of thing that we have to be concerned about as we continue to restrict the development and the addition of housing in our community, because people want to live here, people need to live here, and people will be fleeing to live here. And that's, those are the numbers that we do look at. That being said, Terry, I've been working with you from, you were in the community resource group. Emily, you were there. Heather, you were there back in 2009, I think is when it began, before I rejoined the Eugene City Council. And the work you've done is amazing, particularly considering how many different voices you've had to listen to. I'm looking at a picture that I took right here that has John Rees and Ed McMahon. It has me, it has Mia Nelson and Sean Bowles, and a number of other people who Rick Duncan is in this picture, people who are no longer involved in the discussion, who were involved all along. And you continue to get different voices coming in. And my experience has been that when new people come in and start looking at it, they want to kind of start everything all over again at a certain level. So wonderful job in wrestling all the data, wrestling all the numbers, and wrestling everything that people are demanding of you. But as we move forward, whatever discussion we have, remember, people are fleeing. By many accounts, people are fleeing to live here from hot places because we have water, we have relatively cool temperatures, and it's a desirable place to live. So as we move forward, that has to temper our discussion. I think you're doing a great job as far as identifying land. You're doing a great job because we are constrained by wetlands, we're constrained by riparian zones, we're constrained by agricultural land, and we're constrained on one side by Fern Ridge Lake. So it's and by the ridge line on the south, and by Springfield on the east, and Coburg now on the north, so the job you're doing is amazing. And really, when I talk about these things, I'm not faulting you or anybody who's involved in the process, because I think you've been, and I'm looking at Heather, I was telling Heather and the staff over there how much I've enjoyed working with Heather for longer than, we probably care to admit. But the work you do is fantastic, and I applaud it, and I rejoice in it. But bear in mind, more people want to come here, and I don't know that those numbers are even close to accurate as far as how many people are going to be living here in 40 years from now. I don't think they're anywhere close.
Anybody else? Commissioner Bozovich?
Thank you. Anytime you're doing long-range planning, people can argue with projections. But planning for something is better than no planning at all. And I really want to applaud this effort and the work you all are doing, and particularly your inclusion of the new area around Fisher Road to make sure we're including enough land to at least meet the full 30-year horizon that we were looking at. I think that was a very important step by the planning staff. And I really appreciate that, because I think looking at the longest horizon possible is helpful. Having been on an ETAC before I changed jobs and was looking on the technical side of how to provide services for areas like this, it's great to establish those boundaries, because that allows the utility providers and the other service providers to understand where they're going to have to provide services for the next 50 years. It's an important question to answer, because, if you go back and look at some of the master planning that's been done for the water system for EWEB that I was, that predated even my time at EWEB, it includes areas that are not in this map. It goes far west out into Oak Hill and in some other places. So we're holding on to EWEB actually owns property on top of Oak Hill, where they purchased a piece of property for a future reservoir site. You know, so there's, you know, things that were done in the past based on, you know, not having a real clear plan of where we were going to grow. And having a clear plan of where we're going to grow is going to save a lot of resource and a lot of planning time. So I really applaud this effort. The two things I would note, I just happened to be having breakfast with the mayor and the new city manager for Veneta the day after I attended your meeting, and I brought my map with me to show them. They had no idea that you guys were looking at that Fisher Road area. So there hadn't been communication with the adjoining city yet. So I strongly recommend that you have some outreach to both to Veneta and Junction City, because you're now talking about touching urban growth, urban reserves with Junction City's urban growth boundary, which they haven't done urban reserves, but.
We have reached out to Junction City and have another meeting coming up with them, but you're right, we have not yet reached out to Veneta. They are on our list, especially now that once we expanded, we realized that we were definitely getting closer.
Yeah, because they've made a significant effort to work with ODOT on planning for expansion of 126 from the Eugene city limits out to them, because Eugene wasn't participating at all. But now, if you're looking at growth that far out into 126, the conversation around 126 planning has to be joint instead of one-off. You know, we're going to plan up to your city limits, and because you guys just don't want to participate. I think you can't have that "I don't want to participate anymore" attitude if that's where future growth may happen. So that's part of what I was looking at in particular is that transportation infrastructure planning that goes with deciding to go that direction. Knowing the soils out there, though, you're not going to see a whole lot of high-grade ag soils. You know, it's some pretty clay soils with high water tables. They're not very high productivity. I think ryegrass is about all you can get out of them. Just those coordination, and I also got some questions from a resident up Prairie that, you know, is in the Junction City School District and was wondering how she could be included in the urban reserves. So I think there needs to be some communication with also the school district around that. They're not used to being part of a metro system as providing schools so much. And I think some conversation and understanding for them about some of those ramifications would be a good idea. I noticed it doesn't look like you're touching Crow Applegate, Lorraine, or Fern Ridge with that. For the most part, everything else is in Bethel or 4J, who have consistently provided urban school systems. So, you know, Junction City's school district stretches out into Cheshire and almost out into Triangle Lake, you know, somewhere about Low Pass, I think, is a dividing line with Blatchley. So they're very much more rural school system. So it'll be a change for them to pick up a piece of the city of Eugene. So that's kind of just those couple recommendations for some further outreach. Keep charging ahead as fast as you can. It's, you know, I know you guys are a little bit behind. It's frustrating for me somewhat because I was involved in a lot of those conversations about the grand bargain, you know, to go ahead and adopt Envision Eugene and not fight it because it didn't have any expansion. But with that, this was supposed to be moving ahead quickly, and it seems to have not moved as fast as I would like it to because we do have a housing crisis. I think Commissioner Farr went far enough into detail about that, and we need to just keep looking at what we can do to relieve that pressure on our system by providing the land necessary to build on. So I just want to thank you for your effort, and thank you for the idea of moving out into that Fisher Road area to make sure we have enough land for the full 30 years.
Bernie.
I don't have the plan. I have no planning background. I want to make that clear. So I defer to some of the planning comments of Commissioner Bozovich. I don't have the longevity of active public participation in the Eugene community as Commissioner Barr. I'm qualifying all my comments here. And I'm the only person sitting before you that does not have any part of Eugene in my district. Having said that, when I first moved here 30 years ago, and I moved to Eugene because really realtors kind of pointed my family in that direction, and had I known Springfield, I would have opted to live in Springfield back then. I live in Springfield now. And I remember moving to Eugene, and neighbors said that Eugene's culture is famous for process and planning, but not necessarily results or action-oriented. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying that's what I heard 25, 30 years ago. My questions are within the context of the time value of money. When were the projections you were discussing, the 20-year projections, you have 10 years, when were they made?
I'm going back to that table. The population projections that we're using for urban reserves are from 2019.
No, but you were talking about a planning process that's going to end in another 10 or 12 years.
So the population.
And you got some initial numbers that you were presenting.
Right, from over here, from this table here. The
Thank you.
population projections that we used in our urban growth boundary analysis were from 2009.
Okay.
And then those numbers were updated based on the 2019 population projections that became available when we started doing the urban reserves analysis.
Gotcha.
So they're two different time periods based
Right.
on when that analysis happened.
Get it this closer to home, and you might not know this. I've read many articles that have identified how many people moved in to Eugene in whatever the period of time was versus how many units of housing were built in that period. And there was a tremendous mismatch, as I recall. So given that mismatch, and actually I really agree with Commissioner Farr's remarks, I would, and this is why I asked about when projections were made, and I appreciate the updating, but I think that there are a couple of things that will suggest the projections are low. And of course, everything is premised, right, upon what we're projecting out we have to accommodate. I think that even though prices are increasing here, this is one of the least expensive cities in the western United States to live in. And those prices are going up and up and up. With that and the conflation of many people moving here for either retirement or their children are here, or truly because of the things Commissioner Farr mentioned, water availability, clean water, clean air, and other climate things that are driving people out, including the cost of living. Just take southern cities in California. The cost of living is pushing people here. I think that the longer planning takes, because I mean, the more out-of-date planning will be, if that makes any sense. And I think that the people that really suffer in terms of home ownership are the people who do live here because they didn't move here from an economy that might have had higher prices. So I just want to share my concerns with the Eugene planning process. I know it's incredibly thorough, but I'm concerned about whether timeframes can be accelerated. Last question in that regard. On this urban reserves outreach process, and forgive my eyes, but I believe towards the winter of 2021, decisions will be made by governing bodies. So how long between then and when property is developed or can be developed, or when we see things in the ground and things being built? I mean, is it another few years? I don't know the process. Forgive me for my naivete.
Take that one?
Sure.
Okay. You heard Rebecca talk about the growth monitoring program, and this is something that we're building in-house at the City of Eugene to take account of how growth and population and housing cost, housing density is happening versus our projections. So we're developing that system right now to try to get better and monitor how our projections are happening in real time. Our first monitoring report, Heather's crossing her fingers over there, is due to be delivered to our council early 2021. So that's when we'll have our kind of first reality check on how our numbers have caught up during all of the planning that we've been doing. It's a very important part of the process, and it leads into what do we do with that land. Let's say we're successful with approving an urban reserve on that timeline that Rebecca presented, and you agree, and the council agrees to put it in place. And then we get the results of the monitoring report, and our city council looks at those numbers and directs staff on what to do with them. Because we don't have the report yet, it's hard to say what it will tell us. But assuming it says we're growing faster than we thought, and we're running out of land faster than we thought, then we would move into a process of analyzing our buildable land again.
Do you need a model to know that you're growing faster than you thought and that you're running out of land faster than you thought?
I think we do. We want to have the data to back up our decisions, and we need good information to have an urban growth boundary expansion that will survive appeals.
I'm not trying to be contrarian at all. I understand. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other thoughts? Well, I just wanted to share a couple of those areas in the map of expansion are not too far from where I live in the Spencer Creek area, namely Gimple Hill and the other areas in the southern hills. There you go. Gimple Hill's already been prepped that they might eventually land into the reserve department. They're already, both these areas really have little water. They're having water issues already. And so, you know, folks in Gimple Hill would like to be hooked up to eWeb already. And knowing that in the future, whenever the city moves to those areas of the reserve, knowing that eWeb and the fire district and all those folks are coming along with it, I just want to put out there that in some of these border our wildland urban interfaces in which there's trees, we're talking about fire hazards, more people, which means a higher probability of folks, you know, having a fire incident that we need to respond to, and then ensuring that our services are well capable of meeting all of those needs. You know, I firmly believe that a healthy county, healthy city, they grow over time, and that's how you know that you're doing well. But I also share the concerns of my other commissioners where we have these projections, they're the best information we've got now, matching them or exceeding them is possible, in which case we need to couple these efforts with not only having reserves, but ensuring that we're also working on density within the city core, which I think I mentioned last time that you were here. And I know that the city is moving steps on some issues, but I don't think that reserves are in isolation of other housing activities that are needed within the city boundaries to ensure that different kinds of housing are available at affordable prices. When I think of the expanding reserves, it is very possible that the homes that may be built on these reserve areas are more expensive and may not necessarily be the affordable housing that we're all searching for so badly within the urban core. And so I want to balance those things with knowing that we need to do this work, we need to have healthy reserves, but we also need to make sure that we are not ignoring how we are dealing with advancing density and alternative housing models within our urban centers. And that is a holistic conversation to be had by all entities, all parties. And I'm gonna leave it at that since my voice is just going on me, and I apologize, and please excuse my coughing fits in the middle of your presentations.
Can I comment real quick on that? I failed to mention when I was answering Commissioner Burney's question that the next time Eugene looks at an urban growth boundary analysis or expansion, we are required and planning to look at efficiency measures inside before. And that's a requirement of state law. We will definitely be doing that. And we do continue to have a lot of staff and project energy devoted to housing on other projects in addition to the work we're doing on in urban reserves.
Very good.
Yeah, and this is a version of the diagram that you have in your packet that shows how the growth monitoring program and our UGB analysis is, as Terry said, oh, sorry, I just got Lindsay in the head, is really this piece that's called efficiency measures and development incentives is the piece that we're required to do first before we expand. We're required to look at how can we grow more compactly within the urban growth boundary. Then if we make changes and we still need more land, then we can expand. But we need to do that piece first. And so I think that that echoes what you're saying about not just focusing outward, but focusing inward also. Yeah, so it's separate than this project, but it's very closely linked.
Commissioner Farr?
Ever so briefly, just a boost, a word of encouragement. You guys are great. You've done a superb job working together. You've had multiple barrages throughout the years. But I'm going to leave you with one last quote. And I've got a quotation mark around this, but no name attributed to it. So it might have been me that said it. I don't know. But it might have been John Rees. It said, "We will keep envisioning Eugene for a short while longer. The end of the data gathering phase seems to be in sight." That was January 14th, 2011. So we have job security ahead of you. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us.
All right, we appreciate it.
We'll see you in a few months.
Okay, we'll see you then, and we'll move on to item 10B, which is a report from the Lane County Planning Commission 2019 Annual Report. And we still have Lindsay Eigner to help us with that.
Clear out. Good afternoon again. I'm going to invite, we have a couple planning commissioners in the audience. I'm going to invite any of them up to join me, if that's all right with you.
Please come forward.
All three of you want to join? Just two? Okay.
Colonel, I'll give you my chair.
All right. So with me today is Mr. Lemler, and he is the current vice chair of the Planning Commission, and Mr. Weeks, who was the chair the majority of 2019. The Planning Commission does their chair election from October to October each year. The current chair is Charles C. Kaler, and she's unable to attend the meeting today. So before you today, we have the 2019 Lane County Planning Commission Annual Report. The Planning Commission serves as a volunteer advisory committee who is appointed by the board to advise you on land use matters. In addition, the commission functions as a citizen involvement advisory committee for Lane County in all aspects of comprehensive planning and pursuant to ORS Chapter 197. Pursuant to Article 2, Section 4 of the Planning Commission bylaws, the report must be provided to the board on an annual basis that documents specific activities they have commenced in the previous year. The Planning Commission is comprised of 9 members, and in 2019, we had no new members join us. We were full the entire year, which we were very thankful for. And we had strong attendance by the majority of our commissioners, which we greatly appreciate their time and commitment. We met 13 times between January 15th and December 10th, which included 9 public hearings and 3 work sessions on different topics. So I'm gonna go over the highlights of 2019 unless either of you wanna chime in on that? Okay. So some of the highlights of 2019 include 4 meetings on one application for a comprehensive plan amendment from forest land to natural resource mineral, and it was for a quarry. And I believe the applicant was ODOT on that one. We had 1 meeting on the 2019 solid waste management plan that came before the board as well. We had a meeting regarding Lane Code Chapter 14 amendments just before it came to you last summer. We had 4 meetings with the City of Eugene, 2 work sessions on urban reserves, 2 work sessions on the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan update, and 1 public hearing on the Eugene Airport Master Plan update. That was a joint public hearing with the City of Eugene Planning Commission as well. Members represented the Planning Commission by participating on triple bottom line sounding boards for both urban reserves and the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan update. Each of those triple bottom line sounding boards met once in 2019, and they will have meet at least 1 more time in 2020 regarding those projects. We've had 2 meetings with the City of Cresswell projects. We had a public hearing and work session on amending Goal 1 and Goal 2 of their comprehensive plan, and a separate public hearing for updating their transportation system plan and Goal 12 of their comprehensive plan. And we also had a training session for the Planning Commission on fire siting standards this last fall. So those are the highlights from our 2019 Planning Commission. And I'm happy to answer any questions. First, I will offer the mic to either of our commissioners.
Sure. Commissioners, I've been on the Planning Commission for almost 2 years now, and it's been such a pleasure. I've truly enjoyed it and learned a lot. Sorry about my voice, too. Excuse me. One of the things that I learned quickly was just how strongly we were charged with Goal 1, which is citizen involvement in the planning process. And I can assure you that we take it very seriously, and that we have had many citizens come and give their opinion on different issues. And it's been quite interesting to listen to the dialogue that takes place between the planning commissioners. But I wanted to just bring that to your point, that it is a very strong and important aspect of the Planning Commission is citizen involvement. And I'm also very appreciative of the level of expertise and interest of the various planning commissioners. It's been a real eye-opener for me to see all of the issues that we have to deal with and how knowledgeable my fellow commissioners are, and I've learned an enormous amount from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Sorry about the voice. I just wanted to thank staff for their support for the Commission during the year, which has been really good. We've been able to get down to work much more rapidly with well thought out presentations, which enabled us to talk about them quite well. The training, I think, during the year has been an aspect which has started to appear as a new one, and our organizational capability looks like it's going to improve in the years going forward. So I'm very grateful for that. And I'd also like to thank the commissioners themselves for the extra staff that have arrived. Staff improvements have definitely led to a reduction in workload on the planning director, and I think that is going to pay dividends, especially with them all being so busy. That's about my comments.
Thank you very much. Any other comments out there? No, there's another one. Okay. Well, thank you for the presentation. Any reflections, comments from the board of commissioners here? Commissioner Bozevich?
I just want to take a moment to thank the citizen volunteers of the Planning Commission. As I've been involved, at least in interviewing most of you prior to your appointments, and one of the things I like to explain to you is it's probably one of the biggest time commitments we have for citizen volunteers because of the amount of background material you have to read, the understanding of the state's complex and the county's complex land use laws, and then looking at the attendance record and knowing that a lot of you are very rural, coming from different directions, including, Gary Rose all the way over from the coast. In the wintertime, coming for meetings and all that stuff, and running a construction company just on the side. You guys are all involved in the community, but yeah, I look at that list and the expertise on our Planning Commission. I am really thankful for the group we have together right now. Larry Thorpe's knowledge from his years of law practice. You've got former mayors. You've got, Randy, who's been involved in land use issues with his previous employer for a long time and on the city's planning commission. And, it's just the quality of folks serving and your dedication and time, I just can't appreciate enough. And it shows when you guys make a recommendation to us. I don't remember that we've ever overturned what you guys have sent to us, over the last several years. And that says something. There hasn't been that situation where we've had to recommend against the Planning Commission unless there was something that came up in between. And and I don't think I'm trying to remember when that's happened. And I can't right now put my finger on it. So just great work you guys are doing and great commitment. And thank you.
Anyone else? Commissioner Bernie.
I want to thank you, too. When I first came on board a whole year ago, I had no idea. Within the first month, I documented this, by the way, there were over 1,600 of land use planning background pages for things that we were supposed to tend to. And as I learned what all the planning commissioners do and the depths to which you dig in and do it, I learned in a hurry to appreciate the filters and the research and the recommendations that your body made to our body. So I want to thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
I don't want to manufacture words just to say something, but really, a really deep thanks for exactly what Commissioner Bozevich said and what Commissioner Bernie followed up on. You guys spend a lot of time. In fact, when I was a Eugene City Councilor, it just blew me away how much more time the Planning Commission, Eugene Planning Commission at the time, spent than the city councilors on business. And when there's something to consider, it's the same with you all. You do it diligently, you do it without complaint. In fact, you do it smiling. And it's just impressive the input that you give to help us make the wisest decisions that we can possibly make. I like quotes, and there's a quote, it's just about DLCD, not about the Planning Commission, but that's a part of the Senate Bill 100 goal, and that's DLCD is a Department of Land Conservation and, what's that last word? Development. So it's interesting that you take that, you do take the balance of conservation and development, and that's really what it's all about. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I concur. I won't go into in-depth remarks just because of my voice, but I concur with all of my fellow commissioners. Thank you so much for your time and effort that you put into volunteering for the Planning Commission. You're appreciated very much.
Thank you, Commissioners. We'll pass that back to our fellow commission members.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right. With that, we'll move on to item 11, Commissioner's Business. And under Commissioner's Business, you'll notice there's Section A for announcements and Section B, which says future board assignment and requests. That's changed. Previously, we had A, B, and C, one for agenda team requests, one for work session, but we kind of always mixed it in together. So we're trying out one item called future board assignment requests. If that doesn't work for anybody, please feel free to let me know, but we're going to try it out and see how it goes. So we'll first start with A, announcements. Any announcements? No? I've got one, but go ahead, Commissioner Bozovich.
Then I'll have one, too.
Okay.
Just real quick, I want to report back that the resolution that was put forward to AOC and approved is moved to NACO, and NACO's accepted it, and I will be carrying it to whatever committee they assign it. In addition, yesterday I attended a meeting representing the county on behalf of the community corrections funding request we've made to the legislature this session with the chairs of Ways and Means, and it looks promising to get additional funding at this time, but they are looking at additional either system reforms or accountability because they're concerned about additional money and having that accountability. I'd argue that the community corrections system is one of the most accountable things in the state. We have to prepare a plan, we have to submit our budget, we report on it, it's monitored, all of our data is available online and open to the public. But that's neither here nor there. I appreciate their desire to look towards a system that is as modern as possible and as accountable as possible. So I support that, but it was a good meeting, and it sounds like we may be getting the fix we need to repair some of the temporary fixes we made in the budget to, strap up our system right now, maybe, be able to refund, for the second half of the biennium, put back some of those positions in parole and probation and some of the jail beds and all that we lost sort of in our PSCC budget.
Very good. Commissioner Farr?
Thank you. This is really just a word about the progress that Lane County is making in general. You know that we have people touring Lane County to see the innovative ways we approach housing here. Now, we all feel like we're under a heavy load. We sometimes feel like we're swimming upstream to make things happen. But people come to visit us to see how we're using our nonprofit network along with government and private industry to make things happen. Today at lunchtime, I was interviewed by Como TV. Como is Seattle. And they had just recently done an article on community-supported shelters, our community-supported shelters. And the article that they did got in the neighborhood of 7.5 million views, which I think is a lot, even for that type of an article. So they're doing a follow-up because they were frustrated that the article they did didn't have any impact as far as changing the way government looked at things. The way agencies looked at things in the Seattle area. So they came back and they were asking, what they wanted to know is, how do you get people excited about housing in Eugene and Springfield and Lane County in general? And really it was Lane County they were talking about because where we were was in the county, it wasn't in the city limits. And they said, particularly, how do you get people to accept it in neighborhoods? And I'm kind of smirking to myself thinking, well, how do we? We don't. It's a continual uphill battle, but that was the question that they asked. They want what we're doing. He said, he named the King County and the other counties in the immediate vicinity of Seattle. I guess Snohomish County, maybe, whatever they are. And he said, we need to get them looking down here, to tour down here, to see what you're doing. And we're looking at community-supported shelters, which does most of their work without a great deal of government assistance, other than the land that they locate on. They were intrigued by the Conestoga concept. They said, well, why Conestogas instead of tiny houses? And then, we do both, Conestogas and tiny houses. Conestogas at the cost of $1,000, tiny houses at the cost of starting at 18,000-ish, plus the cost of land and system developments, et cetera. So what I wanted to point out is that while we sometimes feel like we're in a morass in terms of finding ways to get people who are unhoused into housing, we're viewed from a distance as being a bright point of how things are happening, which does nothing more than encourage us to continue to do the things that we're doing and continue to find ways to further involve the community, and especially to find ways to get land banked so that when the money becomes available to use shovels, we are shovel ready. And that's what we're seeing happening in Springfield yesterday. We heard about it yesterday, that Springfield's interested in banking beyond the current
I've been.
and they're not the only ones. So, let's continue our approach, continue what we're doing. And once again, this is Como TV out of Seattle that came down here to film us as what we're doing in Lane County for housing. So encouragement. I walked away smiling, thinking, well, on the days that I really feel like I'm up to my knees in mud, really, we're doing some of the things that we're doing are right, and we just need to continue doing them. So, thanks.
Commissioner Bernie.
If I may, I would just like to pick up on what, I almost said Senator Farr, on what Commissioner Farr just stated. And I know he'll agree with this, but it's not just what we are doing. I recently joined a Facebook group called Yes in My Backyard. This body has been articulating this, and I believe there is a bubbling up of community interest and community groups that are advocating saying yes, that are advocating solutions. And it's very gratifying to be at this moment on this Board of Commissioners with this action-oriented staff attempting to respond. So that's very cool. And just a word about land banking. I can claim absolutely no credit for the city of Springfield's aggressive stance in that regard, but I can say that I've been advocating and continue to the notion of nonprofits and public interest groups and public entities in fact securing and banking land, because as we heard earlier today, siting is really the issue for so many of the services that we're trying to provide. So I just wanted to say ditto. Thank you.
Very good. All good announcements. I had the pleasure to go up to Portland to visit their navigation center with Mr. Mokarheisky and the city and several other folks, including Brittany from the chamber, and visit the facility. It was very nice. It was smaller than I anticipated, but it serves about 100 people. And we're thinking about a 75-bed shelter. I was almost thinking, well, 100 might work for us too, but it's all relative to the size of the city and the need. And I came away feeling a lot better about sprung structures, which I was very leery about at first, just because of their longevity and the cost associated with that. So they think it will be about a 30-year lifespan for their sprung structure. They have a lot of expertise up there that we're really trying to glean as much as we can as we implement ours. And so I think that went really well. I also attended the first Oregon Housing Economic Summit in Salem. And that was attended primarily by realtors, of which I am one. But that's not how I learned about it. I learned about it just by something, an invite that came through my email. But it's also for builders and for anybody in the housing sector. And they had several electeds at the very end. It was just a one-day conference trying to get stats on housing. It was very informative. I look forward to how it evolves next year. But it's really a blend of economic development, housing needs, and strategies to expand any kind of housing that really is needed throughout the western states. So if we have a chance next year, it's a great thing to go through, or go to. If there's no other announcements, we'll go to B, future board assignment requests. Any future assignments? Commissioner Berney?
I would request the board consider a presentation by Brenda Wilson, Executive Director of LCOG, on both the status and what we need to do to help as it relates to the Lane County complete consensus count, upon which so many public services and resources for them are allocated.
I'm a head nod on that. I think it's be great for us to champion census count, and how long did you think that would be?
I have no idea. I think we would want to talk with her about that.
Okay. Somewhere around 30 minutes or so before April 1st. There's enough head nods, we could do something like that. Okay. Any others? I have one. I got a request by the League of Women Voters, and I'll just read it to everyone. As I'm sure you all know, 2020 is the centennial of the founding of the League of Women Voters, as well as the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. In recognition of the League's mission to encourage informed and active government participation, and that the democratic government depends upon the informed and active participation of its cities, and acknowledging the many public policies the League and county have worked on together over the years, we ask the county to issue a proclamation recognizing these anniversaries. We believe a proclamation from Lane County would raise the public's awareness of their importance of their involvement in the government and encouraging them to do so. Attached is a draft of a potential Lane County proclamation. Issuing the proclamation on our actual birthday, February 14th, would be great, but we would be celebrating all year. And there is a resolution attached, which I've passed through Alex Kyler, who has given its okay. May need to go through a few other staff. If this is acceptable to commissioners, I can move it forward to staff for review, and I can hand it out for people to read as well. Commissioner Bozovich.
I'll just restate my concern about passing proclamations at request of outside groups. It does drive staff time. It does cost us money. I would much rather honor the League by supporting their efforts to redefine how we do redistricting and follow some of their recommendations of moving redistricting into a separate independent committee rather than having elected officials choose their voters, and work and set a work session on that as a way of honoring their anniversary versus a proclamation. Just my personal feelings, but you have to be careful if we start honoring every outside group's request for a proclamation. I know that it got other jurisdictions in trouble when they didn't honor one request, when they were continually passing proclamations and then they chose not to honor one. The choice to not honor one generated hours of public testimony and consternation for one particular city a little bit to the north of us. So, I'm just my caution about handling proclamations, the staff time and cost of them, and how do we really honor that organization and try and help them move their agenda ahead.
Commissioner Farr?
Is it time sensitive, Commissioner?
Well,
February 14th.
The 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment is February 14th, which I feel is pretty significant. And so they would like it, but it's not required.
Thank you for that. And if we're going to do it, I'd prefer to do it in time for them to have that as a part of whatever celebration they plan for that date. You know, I share Commissioner Bozovich, and I think we all share Commissioner Bozovich's concern about if we do for any one group, why do we not for another group? At which point it becomes incumbent on me to be able to explain why I supported or didn't support. And I take that responsibility pretty seriously. So in this situation, I'm going to say yes. You've got my head nod on this. I'd like to see more of it, more about it. But I trust and understand what it is you're putting forward. And based upon that, you know, if there's a question regarding why would I support it, I'm prepared to explain that. And in the future, if somebody asks for a resolution, I say no. If somebody asks me why I don't support it, I'll be prepared to explain that too. So, thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Bernie.
Did I hear you say that this has already been reviewed by Alex and that he said it looked good?
Yes, although it is possible that maybe legal counsel needs to look at it or
Okay.
another view
So, yeah.
before it's finalized.
Okay, so I absolutely agree with Commissioner Bozovich's concern, and yet I also absolutely agree with Commissioner Farr's point. The 100th anniversary of women's right to vote, I don't think they're going to come for us for year 101 or 103 or 107. So I would say that an institution like the League of Women's Voters that I was raised with, I mean, I learned about democracy largely through the League of Women's Voters. And by the way, the League of Women's Voters and Springfield City Club were the only ones that sponsored a debate that enabled an airing of ideas and education in my particular district. So on this one, I'm echoing your words a lot today, Commissioner, but on this one, I'm prepared to explain why I support it, and there will be others most others probably that I won't support, and I will be prepared to say why I won't support those, but you have my head nod on this.
Thank you very much. And to Commissioner Bozovich, I think that in this case, it's prudent really to be able to do both. I mean, the 100th anniversary is very significant for many of the women in our community, in our county, and not to mention the nation. But I also believe in the same thing of honoring them as well and their involvement in how we do our redistricting. And we actually will have the next session of redistricting presentation fairly soon, next couple of weeks. So we'll continue down that path as well. Yes, Commissioner Bernie.
I also agree with Commissioner Bozovich. That is the best way to honor them, is by doing what they're recommending and engaging in their work. I would also like to say that on behalf of my granddaughters, my daughters, and my wife, the 100th anniversary happens to fall on Valentine's Day. And this will make my Valentine's Day much sweeter.
Right, what a special Valentine's Day.
Isn't that Oregon's birthday too?
Is it,
As a
is
state,
it February
yeah.
14th? Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so our next item is a 3:30 time certain up in the small conference room. So we'll recess until 3:30 and we'll see you all there in the small conference room. It's my knock. We'll call together Board of County Commissioners to resume our afternoon meeting of January 28th, 2020. And what we've got on our docket is item number 12, Health and Human Services, a discussion regarding the update of permanent supportive housing options. And with us is Karen Gaffney, our Director for HNHS, and Jacob Fox, Executive Director for Homes for Good. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Buck and Commissioners. I'm just briefly going to tee this up, and the bulk of the presentation is going to be from Jacob as he reviews a lot of the work that's been happening at Homes for Good. As the board will remember, early in 2019, we received the recommendations of the TAC report that included a recommendation to create 350 units of permanent supportive housing as part of our 10 recommendations to address homelessness in the community. We've been working hard to get those projects in the pipeline. We have broken ground with Homes for Good on the project at MLK, which is exciting. And we've been talking with the board about the next project in the pipeline, which has the opportunity for some funding from the state. As part of that work, we met with the board in October to talk about potential properties, including the fairgrounds, and our agreement to go cast a wide net and look at available properties that could be part of this work around permanent supportive housing. So our discussion today is to provide an opportunity for Jacob to give an update on the property review that has been happening since we last met with the board, and answer any of your questions as we move forward with being able to submit a property for our grant proposal for state funding. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jacob.
Great. So I'm going to move through this fairly quickly. You've seen a lot of this material before. There's a little bit of new material that I'll pause on and take a little bit more time. And that's kind of the plan. Feel free to interject or ask questions along the way. And this will only take probably 15 minutes of presentation. We'll have ample time for questions and discussion. So essentially what we've talked about before, but wanted to put a slightly finer point on it, is that after the goal of 350 units was endorsed by the Lane County Commissioners and the City of Eugene Council, we've been in discussions between Homes for Good, Lane County, and the City of Eugene, and with what we're calling the Interagency Siting Committee. And that's just a group that's been exploring different siting options for the development of permanent supportive housing in our community. So we've seen these slides. I'll go through them quickly. This is the parcel that is part of today's discussion on the northwest corner of the fairgrounds site. So we talked a lot about that. I won't spend much time on that.
Well, I'm sorry, could you go back to that?
Yep.
What, is that the parcel, or is that the parcel with the fairgrounds site?
Yeah, so the red border is the entire fairgrounds property, and this orange highlight is the 0.74 acres that's 4 tax lots in the northwest corner.
Bad eyes. Thanks.
So this has kind of been a work in progress. Obviously, I've kept the Homes for Good board updated on this, but we have site control of the property at 11th and Charlotten, and I'm gonna get it. And we've we have control of the property through a legally binding letter of intent to purchase. We often use that as a mechanism to do due diligence, so we have 4 to 6 weeks to do due diligence, and then we would enter into an option agreement on that parcel. And Nora's working on just modeling how many units we can develop there, and looking at a variety of land use issues associated with that site. So whether it's a viable site or not, we're not sure yet, but we're looking closely at it. This is a parcel we are super interested in developing affordable housing and also permanent supportive housing units. And it's the Naval Reserve site. It's been difficult to get the City of Eugene to to really kind of tell us what their intentions are with that property long-term, but I think there's a high likelihood with the goal that's been committed to by the Lane County Board and City of Eugene Council that affordable housing will be developed on this site, so we're actively working with the City of Eugene on that. I guess what I would also say related to the fairground site and the Naval Reserve site is on Friday I had the opportunity to meet with Ted Koopman, who's the chair of the Jefferson Westside Neighborhood Association. He responded enthusiastically to the possibility of permanent supportive housing being developed in his neighborhood. I would caveat that by saying he's part of a board, chair of a board, so I didn't meet with the entire board, just with Ted, but his gut was that he felt his board is going to be supportive of permanent supportive housing in the Jefferson Westside neighborhood. So they obviously don't speak for every neighbor, but as a board, there's interest and support. So I talked about the Naval Reserve site. This is a site that we've looked at as well. It's county-owned, but honestly, the Naval Reserve site's a better site, but we'll certainly continue to do due diligence on this site as well. And then I'll kind of tick through these pretty quickly, but the City of Eugene has a number of parks sites that we consider underutilized and possible candidates for permanent supportive housing development. What we've gotten from them thus far is a commitment that city staff that work on affordable housing will engage with city staff in the Parks Division to determine whether some parks properties could be viable land in the future. One of Corey's ideas, which was really good, was another parcel on the fairground site. The due diligence that we did indicates that the setback from the Amazon channel makes that site just too small to develop affordable housing on. We have a site that houses a building called Signpost, thank you. And it is actually permanent supportive housing currently with shelter care clients in it. That site is an older apartment community that's going to need a major rehab and possibly even a tear down redevelopment, but that's obviously something that we'll have to work on over a number of years. And because of the fragility of the people that live in that apartment community, there'll have to be a lot of thought and sort of cautious engagement with the people that live there, because they'll have to be relocated to other permanent supportive housing somewhere before we can redevelop. Really close to that site is a very small privately owned parcel. We continue to look at that. And then actually I had a conversation yesterday with Sean Van Gordon, who was interested in permanent supportive housing in Springfield, which is super exciting to me. There is a parcel at 16th and G Street close to the hospital. And actually, just this morning, we engaged with our broker to have discussions about that site. And actually, there's a letter of interest or intent to purchase that was executed this morning on that site. That may or may not follow through. That may or may not fall through. If it does fall through, certainly we'll take a closer look. I have more detail about that site if anybody has questions related to how it's zoned and some of the challenges associated with that. But it certainly is a site we think is in a good location. But more importantly for me, to hear from a council member from the city of Springfield that they're interested in exploring more PSH in their community, especially for women with kids, is heartening and I think a very good sign. So this is a new graphic that we worked on, and I'm going to stand up because I'm going to point out some of the details. So one of the things that I've realized, and Steve Okerheisky and Karen realized, is we have this goal. How are we making progress against that goal? So you might not be able to see it very well, but I'll kind of talk through some of the elements of this graph. So we think it's really important to just show, like, what have we done so far and how much more do we have to go to achieve that goal? And that's what this is intended to do. So there's another slide on this, but one of the things that we realized is Homes for Good is applying for any rent assistance or permanent supportive housing that is available to apply for. So there's mainstream vouchers that we applied for in 2019. We received an increment of 25. Then got another application in for another round of mainstream vouchers, so we got 25 more. And then we recently received 33 more vouchers of VASH, so that targets homeless veterans. So this is 83 units that I consider should be counted towards the goal. What's a little bit different about these is that they're what I would call tenant-based rent assistance subsidies that are intended for a PSH population, but they're not tied to a unit, and I'll just talk a little bit about the nuances related to that. So we currently have 70 units under construction. Market District Commons has 15 units set aside as PSH because we put project-based vouchers there. That will target homeless vets and people with disabilities. We have the Commons on MLK. Everybody knows that that's under construction, as Karen mentioned. And then the HIP-funded Legion Cottages in Cottage Grove is another 4 units for homeless veterans that's under construction currently. And then we have 86 units in what we call the pre-development phase. Our RAD projects, which are 2 apartment communities totaling 117 units, 48 in Eugene, 170 in Springfield. We've set aside 5 units in each of those buildings as PSH designated. We talked about the fairgrounds site. We think that site can deliver between 16 to 20 units. And then the 11th in Charlottetown, if that work continues and it looks like a viable property, we'll apply for a 9% low-income housing tax credit application this spring. And then Glenwood's also out there as a property we want to develop. And I guess what you can see here is we're either developing buildings that are entirely PSH, or we're setting aside a certain number of units for PSH. So if you total what Homes for Good's doing, we have 111 more units that need to be developed to achieve that 350 unit goal. And then what we did with this graphic is we layered in some other projects that we know and that we consider PSH. It's 33 units in total, and I'm pretty sure that all those are HIP-funded projects. So those are projects that you guys funded in support of your goal of 350 units. And Pat, I see you taking pictures. We're more than happy to send you this graphic. So you can do these quicker. Yeah. So I talked a little bit about this already, but in my experience, project-basing PSH units is a better PSH because the apartment communities where there's place-based permanent supportive housing, they're controlled or owned and managed by organizations like Homes for Good. And then the tenant-based vouchers are also very powerful source of PSH in the community, but people that have very challenging backgrounds are on some level subject to the broader real estate market. They're having to lease up with private landlords in some cases, and those landlords don't have the same sort of depth of experience and resources to support that population than organizations like Homes for Good. So in terms of next steps basically, we're asking today for you to deliberate and basically bless us coming back to you on next Tuesday and dedicating the portion of the fairground site for the development of PSH. If that's the will of the board, then that parcel will be included in an application that will be released by the Oregon Housing and Community Services on February 5th. We'll have 3 to 4 weeks to prepare an application and submit it. We intend to ask for around $4 million from the state of Oregon, and those funds will be used to develop those units. And what's unique about this funding application is there's funds for rent assistance and also for supportive services. And that's extremely unique and part of the reason why this funding opportunity can't be missed. So if the board approves this for development of PSH, we'll do a bunch of land use work and design work through the spring, and break ground in the fall, and bring the units online in summer of 2021. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. So it's now time for us to talk, deliberate, discuss. Anybody have any thoughts they'd like to kick it off with?
May I ask a question?
Of course.
This is one, and I'm looking at Renee right here. This is one that Renee raised yesterday, but it's been raised by everybody.
You shouldn't have come in.
I mean, this is really general. Regarding the fairgrounds property, why was so little notice was provided on that? Why is it happening as quickly as it's happening?
I think there's a couple drivers for that. The first is that when the state legislature approved this $50 million of funding, that's the total pool for the state of Oregon, it came with the requirement that units be placed in service by summer of 2021. So that's a huge driver behind such an aggressive turnaround on the application, site selection, etc. If we were using a 9% low-income housing tax credit or any other kind of tax credit, you simply could not move as quickly as you're able to move with this state funding.
When was the notice of available money dropped?
September 5th.
Okay, that's my preliminary question. Thank you.
I just want to remind everybody, all 5 commissioners are here, even though there's an empty seat. Commissioner Sorensen is on the phone. So Commissioner Sorensen, if you have something to say, just let us know.
I have something to say.
Well, there you go. Feel free.
I wanted to ask Mr. Fox the same basic question, but a little bit more finer point, and that is, since I'm back here in Washington, D.C. on county business and spent the day with the 2 mayors of Eugene and Springfield, providing information to our federal government, they asked me what the timeline was. So it's a little bit more detailed than Commissioner Farr's question, and that is when these decisions are imminent or about to be made, who is consulted? Because the Springfield side of the equation wanted to know if there was more time available so that the Springfield advocacy could take place, and they wanted to know why the decision had to be made more or less now.
So I'll share my opinion, and then Seymour Karaisky or Karen can feel free to jump in. But the interagency siting work that's being done hasn't historically occurred in this community, and frankly, we need 5 to 10 sites that are controlled either by the jurisdictions or by Homes for Good that have been identified for permanent supportive housing development. And then we just map a plan. We know when the money's coming out, and we know where we're going to put the units. Because we sort of collectively as a community haven't identified those 5 to 10 sites that are necessary to address chronic homelessness in our community, we've been in reaction mode, frankly. So one of the things, Pete, that's important for me, and I mentioned earlier, I haven't been certain where the city of Springfield is, and for me to receive a phone call from Councilmember Van Gordon yesterday expressing a desire to develop PSH for families and children in Springfield. That's something I haven't heard from council members yet. And what that means is we can now invite the city of Springfield into the interagency work group and really tackle this issue. The other thing I just flag is in order to control properties or secure properties that aren't currently owned by the jurisdiction, we're going to need a source of funding to basically purchase properties out so we can develop them in the next 3 to 5 years. So I think that's another challenge, is that between the jurisdictions and maybe high wealth business leaders in the community, I think we need $5 or $10 million of a revolving fund that's set aside so we can actually take down properties and not be in the position we're in right now.
Yeah, and thank you. I also would add that both mayors seem very supportive of the work that your agency and we are doing, but I think that they did have questions about this particular decision, and I told them I was under the impression that the state of Oregon had given us a fairly short timeline, and I wanted to confirm that with you. Is that true?
Extremely short. They released an application for this PSH cohort in September, and then they selected the cohort in early October. And then staff have been going to this training that's 3 days a month? 2
days a month.
2 full days a month, and now they're releasing this application for funding. So for me, that is an unprecedented, quick release of funding from the state of Oregon. I've never seen them move as quickly as they did in this instance.
I would just add that we had 2 joint meetings with the Fair Board in late 2019 after the initial pre-application process. Obviously, this site has been talked about and explored for Conestoga huts and other forms of housing, and there was a desire to allow the work that the Fairgrounds has been doing regarding long-range planning to conclude before a final decision was made, which is why we're sort of now at this place where the long-range planning has been done, the board has heard that report, a decision really needs to be made by next Tuesday because the application process begins next Wednesday. And then I would also just add that if you look at the sites, most of the properties that Lane County owns are in the city of Eugene. They're either road fund properties or we have services that are provided in the largest municipality in the county. And so we own land, and we've typically looked at the land that we own first, along with exploring properties that are owned by cities and private properties. So if you look at the MLK property and the Six and Oak property and the Fairgrounds property, those are all county-owned sites within the city of Eugene. I'm not aware of county-owned property in Springfield that would necessarily accommodate this type of use.
Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. So before I get to some of my concerns about this particular site, I just want to clarify a couple things about your presentation. There's a differential, the 111 units that are left outside the Homes for Good planning, and then there's 78 units overall, you're saying, are kind of left outside of the 350 target we have. In that differential, are you including the Acorn apartments that we gave a HIP grant to for aging out foster youth? Because that is PSH.
It was on this. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's on this slide, Jay.
Okay.
The second.
But let me just confirm.
Yeah, 10 units.
This is the Dev Northwest Polk expansion.
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe that's
Okay,
the same.
that's the Acorn, okay. Yeah, it had a different name when we actually approved the HIP grant. And then the other question on that is, does that include any capacity at Veterans Legacy?
This chart does not include
Okay.
that. And one of the things just to know is when I was creating this over the last couple of days, I do think there's units that exist in the community that we need to add to this. There just wasn't time. I'll give you one example. I know Shelter Care and probably some other organizations like Shelter Care will apply to the state of Oregon and receive grant assistance from like OHA. And it's tracked outside of the it's not really tracked, and it's not in the, under the umbrella of the continuum of care. So I do think that by looking at Veterans Legacy and some other projects, this number will change.
Yeah, they're just getting ready to start at least citing their first permanent caretaker, I think, out there, and
He's there.
he's there, and I think they're getting ready to start programming and opening up to veterans, and that is a form of PSH out there.
Absolutely.
So that capacity is not in that chart. So I want to get to this particular site on the fairgrounds. One of the things I'll first dispute is the master planning is not complete for the fairgrounds. We completed one phase of establishing a master plan, which was the market demand analysis. That was not a master plan, and it hasn't had public involvement. And as you know, this board's been involved in adopting master plans over the last year or two. Think about the involvement and the public engagement that happened with the Parks Master Plan, the Solid Waste Master Plan, and anything else we planned around this community. And for such a huge asset to jump ahead of that planning and start dedicating property is one of the reasons I'm raising this concern. And it's a concern I raised every time this site came up, that we have not completed that process. So I just want to make that clear, is the master planning has not been done for the fairgrounds. We got something that the market analysis people kind of drew up on a napkin about how they might use that corner of the property, but that had no real study. The other thing I want to point out was these properties were purchased with transient room taxes. And transient room taxes, as we do it, not Multnomah County, as we have defined usage for transient room taxes, is to promote tourism. And I believe we are stepping into an area where we're going to have to reimburse this back to if we transfer this property, we will have to reimburse the Lane Event Center Reserve Fund, at least for the purchase price, maybe for the fair market value. So there's a general fund impact to this decision. The third thing that just seems to have been left out of this whole conversation is no one's, and this bothers me because both Travel Lane and the fair boards were not given some of this information when they made their recent letters back to the, and I confirm that from both Carrie and Corey, that they did not know about the floodplain on the site or the TRT issue when they wrote their letters. The floodplain on the site, which I provided the board members, is, you know, that nice little blue coming across there. If you notice that this portion we're talking about is completely out of the 100-year floodplain, which makes it the most usable future use of the property we own. Wheeler Pavilion are you know, and several other buildings like the museum, which we'd like to redevelop, quote, as a hotel, is in the 100-year flood zone. You know, so, you know, as we think about how we're going to develop this property and really master plan it, we may be making decisions based on that, and we've already had a discussion about the 60-foot setback from the Amazon Channel. This is not a 55-acre usable site. It's far less than 55 acres. So this quotes about it's only 2% of the site is not an accurate description. You know, that kind of information wasn't in front of the Fair Board. It wasn't in front of Travel Lane. So I just want to, you know, say that we may have gotten these letters that say, oh, we're kind of okay with this as long as you promise not to touch the rest of the site. Well, they didn't realize the implications of that. You know, there's some other issues here about compatibility of siting families adjacent to fairgrounds, Oregon law relative to nuisance complaints, and how permanent this decision is, that I think we need to have further discussion on. We are being pushed by an artificial deadline, which you guys well outlined how the state has rushed this. At the same time, the city of Springfield has over and over again, and I don't know how anyone could not know this, talked about how they are only really interested in family and children as far as any sort of housing and homelessness issues go. And when they found out that this particular facility was going to be for families and children over the weekend, and they didn't know that till they saw my editorial, that's what stemmed the phone calls.
What editorial? I'm sorry, I'm just kidding you.
Yeah. So suddenly they're like, oh, no one asked us, you know? So, you know, what I would really like to ask this board to do is not provide direction today. You know, give some time, we've got, February 5th is the opening date, but you don't actually have to submit for a while. Give us at least till our our next meeting, which is, February 10th, to make a decision on this and see if Springfield can come through and supply an alternate. Because I think we are doing a disservice to the long-term viability of the fairgrounds and the event center by jumping ahead of the master planning process. And at the same time, we didn't really give one of our partners an opportunity to participate because we didn't really recognize their desire to participate. And I think they may come through for us. It disappoints me that I hear quotes about, from Jacob, that the city of Eugene has been difficult to communicate with about the future of the Naval Reserve. As critical of an issue as this is, because, the county, we, over and over, and Mr. Mokrzycki noted this, we're the ones that put the property forward for MLK. We're the ones that put the property forward for Six and Oak. We're the ones that are out there providing property for other developments where we've provided, car camping at Delta and provided car camping at our behavioral health department. And, we've even gone as far as, giving Carriot Ford property on Highway 99, all on county property. County. When's the city of Eugene stepping forward? We're being forced into taking a piece of a very limited resource outside of the 100-year flood zone and handing it over to another agency for use that's probably going to be incompatible in the long run with the use of the fairgrounds, based on an artificial deadline made by the legislature. And I think we just need to somehow or another say, whoa, let's give Springfield maybe a few extra days, a week maybe, and rethink about this, because we really need to have a very long conversation about the future of the fairgrounds. I appreciate the thoughts that, maybe it isn't the best location in downtown Eugene, but that's a big conversation, one we can't have by February 5th. And I really urge this board to not give direction to move forward with this site based on those understandings. Also understand that some of the communications they've got have been because some of the agencies that they got them from weren't given the whole picture. And I also think we need to wait and see if our partners in the city of Springfield can provide us that win-win situation and alternate location. I wholeheartedly support this project, just not on this site. And I think we're making a permanent decision by putting this site forward prior to doing master planning, and a decision that cannot be reversed. Unless somebody can tell me it can be reversed sometime in the future.
Any other thoughts?
I'd like to go again if, after everybody else has had one time through.
Would you rather I speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
Commissioner
I could tell
Rooney?
that I didn't want, okay. You owe me one of this, I don't want to talk yet. I would like to voice several criticisms of process. I come to a different conclusion than Commissioner Bozovich, but I agree with a lot of his points. But before I do that, what he's requesting, Jacob, from what I understand, that's logistically, is it impossible at this point to wait until February 4th for an application that's due February 5th in the state?
Oh, just to be clear, on February 5th, the state of Oregon will release what they're calling a mini notice of funding availability. And did they say 3 or 4 weeks is the turnaround?
They said they anticipated 2 to 3 week turnaround. So they will release this mini notice, and we have 2 to 3 weeks to submit our response to it for funding.
Okay. I didn't know that. This has been an interesting, a fascinating process, and it's unearthed behavior I didn't anticipate, nor did I know what would happen. On the one hand, you have Homes for Good, who's trying to fulfill its mission of aggressively develop as many units of publicly supported housing and responding to any opportunity for resources, right? And you have the Fair Board, who's trying to fulfill its mission of enhancing the fair, making it a bigger and bigger and better event, improving the facilities, et cetera. And you have a time frame driven by a state that I'm used to taking forever to get things done. And in this instance, if we want the money, it's like, you have to do it so fast. And forgive me, but I'm starting to get cynical in my old age, and I'm starting to think that that time frame was driven by state politicians that would like to demonstrate what they're doing for housing at the local level, but it puts us in a position where it feels divisive, and yet we all want the same thing. That's one criticism. Another criticism, and you can tell me if this is unfounded, I'm just giving you my sense of it. Another criticism is that as I was looking at Naval Reserve site, park sites, you know, the city of Eugene still needs to determine the process for putting out the site and issues related to zoning. I'll tell you what, the county seems to work faster than that. and I don't know what that means. Or Eugene are currently, the parcels in Eugene that are designated for Parks and Rec are discussing internally if any of these may be appropriate. How long do those discussions occur? I don't know. I don't know when they started, and I don't know when they end. But I do know that if we move forward, now, Jay's points may be valid, but I looked at the letter from Lane Travel, and I looked at the letter from the Fair Board, and what I read is that nobody loves this process. The process, I mean, nobody likes it. I hate it. But by the same token, no one wants to lose the money and to develop these units. And from what I read is if this Board of Commissioners, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, but if this Board of Commissioners commits that this will not be an example of any further encroachment on the Fair Board property, and if that commitment is made, and that commitment, as was evidenced today in approving an HVAC system, continues to work on master planning, on upgrading facilities as needed, et cetera, what I read was that they would be satisfied as long as this was not, a one-off deal that in fact would not set a precedent, and our board would commit that it would not. Now, I need to ask, is that correct? Did I state that correctly, Corey?
Essentially.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I won't speak for both boards, but essentially that is correct.
With reservation, this isn't what you wanted to see happen, but.
They would prefer the alternate sites come to the top.
Right, okay. And thank you. And my last comment is that I'm not pointing any fingers of blame, but I have known for the year that I've been a commissioner that the city of Springfield's policy on desired subsidized housing is for families and children. And I know that in my first meeting on the TAC report, one of the Eugene City Councilors said the $64,000 question is, where is Springfield? And I said the $128,000 question is, who invited them? And no one had. So I think the fact that from Commissioner Bozovich's editorial, this kind of fast response has come from Springfield is a good thing. I think that the conflicts that have gone through this process really do point to the need to land bank on behalf of Homes for Good and providing additional housing. And if I'm correct, you can tell me I'm not, I learned that there will be a second round of this funding. And if there is a second round of this funding, as the county commissioner from Springfield, I would very much encourage that you work with the city council, because they've indicated to me that they will aggressively lock up sites and do some land acquisition on behalf of working with Homes for Good for family and children housing.
Right.
So I just want to throw all of that out there and see where it sticks.
Mr. Mokowski.
And I don't want to get in front of
Commissioner
Farr
Farr.
if you want to go
Sure.
further.
Yeah, and I'm just going to address the bullet points as they came up. The master planning is not complete, of course not. And we're comparing the master planning of a single site to multiple sites, which are parks and the solid waste disposal. You know, it's not just a single site, it's more complex when we're looking at parks and the solid waste system where we had to close a number of facilities. So that being said, of course, the master plan is not complete, and it's not just a napkin sketch. It's a how many page document that we received on this? It's 112 pages or whatever it is, on a lot of napkins there. So it's not just a napkin sketch. We know the concept of what may happen to the fairgrounds in the future. So the second point is regarding the purchases being made with TRT. That did come up at the Fair Board meeting yesterday, and it was stated that TRT was what was used, and I think Ms. Mokowski, you may address that, in that if it's necessary to repay TRT dollars, that's something that we've done with road fund, for instance, in the past. I mean, it's a process that is available to repay whatever money is necessary to repay. Now, the floodplain issue is, we're continually hearing more and more about floodplain issues, and that's whatever land we are going to develop, we're going to have to deal with that, wherever it may happen to be, whether it's on that little dog leg right there that's surrounded by residential on 3 sides. You notice residential on 3 sides of that, or whether it's in a more of an open area. We deal with that. We have to deal with that, and it's difficult to isolate a single small portion of the fairgrounds property and to say that this is the only place or one of the only places that we can actually develop for the future, because that's mitigable. Citing families next to the fairgrounds, the discussion came up about having kids within a few hundred feet of the Midway, where O'Hara School is within a few hundred feet of the Midway. A lot more kids than would be living here. So, you know, I mean, and it's not separated by a fence, not as a canal there. There's no fence. The artificial deadline, I'm interested to hear more about that, because I come to the conclusion that could we have noticed this a little better? Could we have gotten more people involved, more of the grassroots? I'm hearing that potentially not. I was, you know, we always bemoan how long it takes the state to get things out. And finally when they do something quickly, we find a way to criticize them for doing it quickly. Well, you know, we can't have both on that. And I really personally appreciate the fact that we potentially are going to have shovel-ready ground ready for when the state really, seemingly on a whim, it's not on a whim, but makes money available. I think it's fantastic that we are in a position where we can respond to it, because otherwise, other people are in line in front of us, and we've seen that happen in the past.
Could I just quickly interject that?
Yeah, please.
Jay, your use of the term artificial kind of throws me a little bit, because it could imply to people that somehow Homes for Good or Lane County leadership is basically making false statements about an application deadline, and that's not true, but I would consider it an arbitrary deadline. It's a deadline set by the state of Oregon that we had no control or influence over.
Thanks.
Point taken, but it's arbitrary being forced on a master planning process, which is putting an artificial deadline on our master planning process.
I say God bless him for it. Regarding Springfield, we do know that Springfield's had a priority of families and children. We've known that since we started, really since the Poverty and Homelessness Board began talking about putting efforts in the metropolitan area around housing. Springfield has always said that. We know that, and it's going to continue well into the future. Not for this tiny little project that we're talking about right here, but for the multiple projects that are down the road. The city of Eugene has been difficult to get information from, the dispute that that's the case. We witnessed that today. Now, sometimes it can take a long, long time to get things done. Now, we're looking at master planning on a grander scale for urban reserve, but let's take Bascom Village, for instance. Jacob, you were here at the tail end of Bascom Village. That was land banked property. That property was already designated, zoned, ready to go, land banked, and it took us about 2 years of public process to make that available until finally St. Vincent de Paul and at the time Homes for Good developed that property. It does take a long time for them to move property, and this is not even land banked. Any of the properties that we're talking about right now aren't land banked yet. There's a process that gets it into the channel for even use in that area. And it's a very public and relatively slow process that the city uses. That is the nature of it. So I think that from my perspective, the due diligence has been done by Homes for Good regarding this. And then it becomes a matter of discussing whether or not the key stakeholders are interested in helping us move forward with the decision that we're making. We have a letter in hand from the Fair Board, which was written yesterday after a fairly lengthy meeting that we had yesterday morning. It's very similar to the letter that Mr. Mulcahy will talk about from Travel Lane County, and it's not dissimilar from testimony, actually, we heard from Karen Ramos this morning, which really hinges the decision on supporting the facility on this 1.34% of the fairgrounds, as long as, for the future, the remainder of the fairgrounds remains intact and stable for its future, for the existing use. And when it's time to move toward a motion to have an order prepared for next week, if we move that direction, I have the thoughts of a motion in mind that would reflect the future use of the fairground as well as use of this property. So I may have more to say, but I'm interested in hearing what other people have to say.
Commissioner, or I almost called you Commissioner Mulcahy.
I am the fifth person at the table.
Senator McCarthy.
Yeah, no, please don't put that on me. I was given the title of attorney yesterday. Oh my God, no. So I just wanted to make a couple of clarifications and then a comment. First, as it relates to transient room taxes, I just want to be clear that both I attended, as did Commissioner Farr, both the Traveling County Board and the Fair Board. Fair Board meeting was yesterday, Traveling County Board was last Thursday. In both meetings, I specifically called out the transient room taxes, that there's a difference of opinion about the legal interpretation, and there may be a legal case that transient room taxes don't need to be repaid. I think Commissioner Bozovich is right. They're probably, given our use, they would need to. But the specific statement I made to both bodies was it would be my recommendation that regardless of legal interpretation, that we reimburse the TRT, the funds to because I think that's a relational issue. I think it's a trust issue that we just need to get right. But I want to be clear that we did call that out for both the Traveling County Board and the Fair Board meetings. As it relates to the City of Eugene, I think it's fair to raise the questions about siting. As Jacob talked about, these sites, the neighbor reserve sites, still on the table. We have not received a definitive answer. We all would like answers quicker than they've come around siting. So I think it's fair for us to continue to push and ask those questions around what about sites owned by the City of Eugene, and the city really needs to step forward with that moving forward. And I, for one, believe that they will. I also think we have to acknowledge that as it relates to funding and coordination with the City of Eugene, in my 6 years, it's never been better than it is today. Lane County and the City of Eugene fund a disproportionate amount of the Human Services Commission, particularly given, Lane County in particular, given the population that we represent, compared to other agencies there for the services that are provided. In addition to funding, we're now at about $2 million, I think, of funding between the city and the county, the City of Eugene and Lane County, that's going towards the 260 plus beds at Dusk to Dawn. We're funding 3 positions jointly between the two agencies. There are weekly meetings that are occurring. So I think I think it's fair for all of our agencies to be pushing each other for what we're not doing enough of, and I'm sure there are things Lane County needs to do more of, but I think we also need to acknowledge where we have really good work that is happening and movement and progress that is occurring. As it relates to this city of Springfield, I share the excitement about the city of Springfield stepping forward, and they have been clear about their focus on families. And they are participating in the Poverty and Homelessness Board. And we're excited about this renewed energy and opportunity to bring them further to the table. We had a meeting last week with City of Eugene staff, and the interim city manager and assistant city manager stayed from an earlier meeting because they wanted to hear what we were talking about related to this body of work. So I think we're headed in the right direction on that partnership. And then I finally would just say, I mentioned this morning on, escapes me what topic it was, that we were, the crisis center discussion around the challenge with these siting decisions. This is where the rubber's meeting the road. Even more difficult than funding is figuring out where we're gonna place, because there's such a diversity of opinions and a diversity of understandings in the community of the populations that we're serving through these different solutions. And so my hope is we can find some version of a win-win, some way to recognize that there's coexistence that can occur. The board has identified housing and homelessness, this body of work, as its top priority. I've heard a commitment to the fairgrounds, the long-term investment in a vibrant Lane Event Center. And my hope is that there's a win-win to be had. And my hope is also, I think all of our hope in the room is that we can use this decision as an opportunity to set the tone for future siting decisions, because this will not be the last time there's going to be controversy about where one of these developments will occur. Thank you.
And when you're ready, I'll take my second time.
Commissioner Sorensen, please.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate the remarks of our county administrator, and it does match with a lot of my comments, but I'll just keep them brief. Number one, I think it would be good to look on the positive features that this decision that we may be making here either today or next week. Number one, when Springfield withdrew from the Housing Policy Board, and that was a bad sign. And so this renewed interest in housing by Springfield's mayor and city councilors, I think, is a really good thing. We ought to encourage that. But having said that, let's remember it's Eugene that enacted a tax to help with the problems of housing. And we, Lane County, did not enact a tax, nor did Springfield. And Lane and the city of Eugene has partnered with the county and has shared the cost of the tax report. Springfield didn't share the cost of the tax report. And so there's a reason that we're seeing Eugene more and more involved than Springfield. So I think that we ought to use this as an opportunity to go formally and invite Springfield into paying for the tax report, paying for being a member of the Housing Policy Board, sending delegates to the Housing Policy Board. We ought to really, say, hey, if you're that interested in housing, hey, let's get going. Let's work as a community. In terms of the order for next week, I don't know how staff feels about this, so I'll just kind of raise it this way. But I agree that we should pay back the money on the TRT. My understanding is that those properties, some of them were purchased with general fund, some were purchased with TRT. And I really agree with the county administrator. It doesn't really matter. It's a relationship thing. They believe that at least some or all of this money was TRT. Well, there's nothing that would stop us from putting general fund money or state housing money back into it for land acquisition. So I feel that's a fair thing to do. The other thing is that the public has been asking questions about the topic of, well, does this mean if the county hands off all of the land to housing, there won't be a fair, there won't be a Lane Event Center. Oh my God, what's going to happen here? And I think we got to be clear that and maybe that there's a place to renew the board's commitment to not sell the Lane Event Center, the fairgrounds, and that they'll be used for public purposes, and specifically for fairgrounds and Lane Event Center purposes. So that might be an opportunity to reinforce the county's commitment to that. I don't know if you want to put it all in one board order, you want to put it in a letter, how you want to do it. I think the housing folks would like to know that it's approved, and in my view, it's not the perfect world, because I'd love to see a lot more process myself, but if we're going to leave $5 million state money on the table because we want more process, I think we have to just make the decision, and that's the decision I think I would come to.
All right, thank you. Well, I'll just put my 2 cents in here for what it's worth. I agree with a lot of the points that have been brought up. Agree with paying back TRT. Also super excited about Springfield and making this a regional game plan for future things. Because I have a feeling more money is coming our way. This is just the beginning of housing money from previous legislative cycles, and we need to be ready. We need to be ready with land. We need to be ready with developers that have the capacity, and make sure we can make decisions as fast as the money comes through. And when it's not, we work on acquisitions and other programs. There's the argument that this isn't the right location for affordable housing. And for me, that smells a lot like NIMBYism, and we really need to know that a place where we're putting permanent supportive housing for women and children in a neighborhood of Jefferson West Side would fit in just fine. So I'm in strong support of the direction that you're going. There is this discussion that's floating around that what we do today is dependent on what we do with the fair in the future. I think these are two separate discussions. I am personally committed to a fairgrounds in our Lane County area. But as Jay said, I think that needs a much bigger discussion, and I feel that it's separate than what's being asked of us today. We had almost 2 hours of discussion regarding the event center the other week, and to me, that displays a lot of pent-up desire to really move through what do we want to do there. I mean, we have a fairgrounds that's in pretty rough shape. I mean, from the report, it's in rough shape. And we need to talk about that more and discuss what it takes to invest in the current site and what that means from a financial perspective, what that means from a community perspective, and what it means to our partners in the city and other agencies that utilize the site. So, I have a full commitment of a fairgrounds, but I'm not necessarily supportive of combining two motions together at this particular point in time. Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. First, I'd just like to go back and clarify a couple things. Yes, there was 112 pages or something in that report, but it was mostly a financial analysis. It was not a master plan. And the sketches of facilities included were just demonstration sketches, not master plan documents. So closer to a napkin for those diagrams, but for the report was a very detailed financial analysis. So I agree, it's more than just a napkin sketch, but as far as a master plan goes, it was just the beginning of a master plan. I want to clarify on the TRT. I went back and double-checked my emails. You are correct. The Fair Board did have some discussion of TRT, but my response back from Carrie Westland was she was not sure they were aware that the land was actually purchased using TRT. And there were other issues she felt, that the Travel Lane Board did not understand when they wrote that letter. One of them was the floodplain. The other was understanding Oregon nuisance law. So just to be fair, yes, the Fair Board did understand the TRT side. They did not understand the floodplain. So neither one had the floodplain maps in front of them when they wrote that letter. So, knowing that, and in Carrie's response to me was, I hope the letter conveyed their prioritization of using other options if possible. So, I would suggest, and I'm just on this whole issue about noise and families and locations, O'Hara's about twice as far and no one sleeps there. Our noise ordinances are written around where people sleep more than anything. So just understanding that, understanding Oregon law, I did provide our county council and the administrator a letter I got from a local attorney discussing that situation and the possibility of future lawsuits for locating folks there, from somebody that has beaten the county several times in court recently. That's just an issue that's going to be there. Anytime you locate residences next to a noise source, is a possible thing, and not whether it's supported housing, if it was market rate housing. So just understanding that housing that close to the fairgrounds has some issues legally possible with it. But what I would like to suggest is that if we are going to give direction about preparing this, that we give direction that allows for the substitution of another site in the grant application if one can be found prior to the submittal deadline that the state sets. If in the next week or week and a half while we're in process with this, Springfield says we secured the site, it's got the right zoning, we can substitute that in. That to me is the commitment around not messing with the fairgrounds. That, if you're going to move forward with this, at least allow them to substitute another site. And then the next round of housing money that comes up may give us enough time to have the full conversation about whether this parcel should be put in the mix. That to me is a commitment to the fairgrounds. A commitment to only identify that property and permanently separate it from the fairgrounds, to me, just does not honor any sort of public process and is really, flies in the face of why we purchased those properties in the first place. I mean, why would we buy residential lots, move the houses off of them, and set it up if there was not the intent to make that part of the whole fairgrounds and utilize that for the benefit of the fairgrounds, which I've mentioned employs over 600 people and generates over $37 million a year in economic activity, which helps people pay rent. So I would really recommend that if the board's going to move forward with this site identified, that there's something in the motion that allows Homes for Good to substitute another suitable site if one's presented.
Any other discussion, comments? Commissioner Berney?
I'm sorry, Jacob, is what Commissioner Bozovich just said logistically possible?
I think it's a stretch for a couple reasons. One, we have a 3-week turnaround on a $4 million grant application. And basically, we've been able to look at the fairground site for many months and really understand land use and how many units. And again, we haven't taken that to funding application level yet because there's been so much uncertainty, but we've had a lot of time to think and walk around that site. And just using the G Street site as an example, Sean Van Gordon called me yesterday and was like, yeah, we should do PSH on the G Street site. Well, Sean's not a land use expert, although he's a super smart guy. But there's all kinds of issues with that site.
Well, I was going to ask you that because I also have been talking.
Yeah.
What are some of the issues? If you don't mind, if the group doesn't mind.
Yeah, so two different zoning types on the parcel, R1 and high density. There's existing office buildings that have, government agencies like FEMA officing in them.
Is that right, on that
So that would trigger Uniform Relocation Act for a business that is like excruciatingly expensive. And someone else has control of that parcel as of this morning. So, and there's more I can send, but I mean, that's a couple quick highlights.
I'm sorry. I think we're beating it to death. A decision has to be made. The reason honestly, I understand but don't agree that these are separate issues, because it creates the real possibility of encroachment, and I think that we do need to consider some sort of reassurance that that's not what this body intends to do. The reason, there's no other piece of the fairgrounds, and forgive me, again, I can be corrected, but as I'm looking at it, been there a lot, but this is my first aerial view as I'm looking at it. There's my understanding is that was or still is zoned properly, it's residential. There were residences on it, I know, because I've heard Commissioner Buck talk about taking one or two of them off of that site. And my understanding is there's not another piece of the fairgrounds that meets that criteria or is sticking out like a sore thumb in terms of the map. I mean, it really is separate. It's part of, it's separate. And my understanding is that I don't pretend to know when, but it wasn't that long ago that was not a part of the fairground, that was purchased. So I don't see the high risk thing here as long as the fairgrounds is comfortable, right? I mean, as long as the fairground needs the reassurance it needs to move forward. My opinion.
If I might add, if we're contemplating a motion that includes reassurance, excuse me. If we do that today, it doesn't mean it won't change. I mean, we can't bind a future board. They can change that in a heartbeat. I just want to state that I think all of the issues brought forward in our last meeting that was so long and in our future discussions begs a bigger discussion on how and what we're going to do with the Lane Event Center and what the master plan really will be in the future, which, as Commissioner Bozovich had mentioned, hasn't been completed yet. I would support a motion that would direct Homes for Good and the county to move forward with this site with the reassurance that I am committed to fairgrounds in Lane County. And just a reminder, we should probably move forward with this soon because we do have another item to discuss before we all leave today.
Did you say you had it?
Yeah, I'll go to the motion. Commissioner Sorensen, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Then I am going to go ahead and combine the motion. And the reason I'm setting it this way is because of some of the wording that is in the Fairgrounds letter of support and the Trevor Lane County letter of support. I move to direct the administrator to direct staff to prepare a board order expressing Board of Commissioners support for use of the .74 acre parcel of the fairgrounds, with the understanding that any future use of the remainder of the fairgrounds will be restricted to a thorough public process, and that the Board of County Commissioners is committed to the existing use of the fairgrounds in continuity.
I'll second that.
Okay?
Does that make sense?
We have a
You must have, you seconded it.
We have a motion by Commissioner Farr, second by Commissioner Sorensen. Any discussion? Commissioner Bozic?
I'm just going to note that I'm going to vote against the motion because I believe both the Fair Board and the travel lane folks did not have all information in front of them when they wrote those letters. I still believe we're making a permanent decision around land that should be reserved for an economic purpose. And I'm sorry that we haven't had a better public process. And it seems like we're, last minute getting stakeholders involved, from people that use the event center didn't know about this, to the travel lane folks weren't very aware of it, and the Fair Board wasn't aware of it. I mean, it took my telephone call to Fair Board member Cunningham to even, they were kind of like, what? And why they had to call a special meeting. This has been a very rushed lack of public process due to an arbitrary deadline set by the state, and I just cannot support it at this time.
Commissioner Bernie?
Even though I come to a different conclusion, I agree with everything that Commissioner Bozic said about the process. Everything. And I just want to say, I commend him because I think he's correct. If he hadn't have done certain things and made calls and brought it to people's attention, we might be experiencing even more difficult of a process now, because if people don't know, they don't appreciate not knowing. I certainly feel that way. So I agree. I come to a different conclusion. I'm going to support the motion.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Farr?
Thank you. And I made the motion, I will support it. And regarding the completeness of the information presented to the Fair Board and to the Travel Lane County, they were given all the information basically that we've discussed today, other than the floodplain information, which didn't come up as a part of the discussion. I'll go on record as saying I don't know that that is pertinent to the decision regarding this small piece of property that we're talking about. I think floodplain issues are going to come up whatever we build, any place, on county property or off property, and that is just going to be an ongoing part of the discussion. We didn't discuss the number of bus trips that occur next to on 13th Avenue either. That wasn't a part of the discussion. The part of the discussion was surrounding the fairgrounds, surrounding the purchase mechanism for the property, and surrounding the continued use of the fairgrounds as a fairgrounds.
Any other discussion? Although, excuse me, it's part of the cold here. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
Motion passes with Commissioner Bozic in the nay. All right. We will move forward to county administration.
And, Chair, I'm going to have to get off the phone at this time, so thanks for letting me participate.
Are you sure you can't stay for just a few moments longer? We do have another item that it would be great to have you here for.
I'll be happy to stay on.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So, Chair.
Please.
It's okay. We received a letter to Chair Buck and the commissioners from Richard Riggs, the Regional Director, Western Region of OSU Extension, on January 16th. This was shortly after the board's last meeting. And essentially the letter, and we'll distribute this to the commissioners, and Danny Jones will send it to you. We'll post it to my announcements here so people can link to it. Their request is that the board that they would like to withdraw their request to have an operating levy placed in the May 2020 ballot. They're requesting that the matter go on the May 2021 ballot. They talk about the understanding of the needs of the county and this extension service. They value their strong partnership with the county, and they believe that a later election better fits the needs of both the county and the extension service. So it's a very positive letter, appreciative of the board's support, and a recognition from their perspective that May of 2021 is a preferable date for them. So I'll leave that for you to discuss.
Thank you. And I think that moves us, I think I'll go straight to other business. Due to the email and the announcement of Mr. Mokrzyski, I would entertain, under other business, a motion to rescind the January 7th, 2020 motion that was confirmed on January 14th to direct staff to work with the Extension Service to provide for a plan to place the extension levy at the amount requested by the Extension Service on the May 2020 ballot.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Burney, seconded by Commissioner Farr. Any discussion? Commissioner Burney.
I'm hugely impressed that it seems as if Extension is placing county needs and timeframes ahead of their own, and greatly values the unanimous support of county commissioners for their ballot initiative, and I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. I think the minutes will reflect the discussion that we had, which was unilaterally in support of the continued funding for OSU Extension. And I think it was kind of over-the-top support, beyond just unilateral support. So.
Any other discussion? I would just add that I think it's very graceful for them to do that. I know that this particular item was really, really tough for each and every one of us because we very much support OSU Extension Service. The timing of this was really challenging for us to make our decision. And, I think when 2021 comes around, we'll be more unanimously supportive at that time. Any other discussion? All right. We have a motion on the table. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Any other business that anybody wants to bring up before our meeting adjourns?
I just need to review assignments.
Yes. Any other business before review? Okay, let's go into review of
So,
assignments.
quickly, we had Commissioner Burney's request for a presentation by LCOG regarding the census. I'm thinking that should be February or March before April 1st.
By the way, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Greg Rickoff texted me and he had talked to, and he said 30 minutes.
Yeah, that should be good.
I'm sorry.
So that one, the presentation on the census, Commissioner Buck requested the proclamation/resolution that you forwarded some information on regarding the centennial for League of Women Voters. And then we'll just, I think the last action you just took on the OSU extension is removing that assignment from the list, so we'll take that off the list. That's everything I had. And then we'll come back next week with an item regarding the board order that you directed.
Anything else for the good of the day? Commissioner Farr.
Under other business, it's not an announcement, it's just a statement that in discussion with community-supported shelters, was the agency that was is planning 3 Conestogas at the thumbprint on the fairgrounds property. They are still moving forward with the plan to place 3 Conestogas there, no matter how short a period they are going to be there for. They still would like to move forward with that plan. The Conestogas, they say, are very portable, can go in and out very easily.
Very good.
Can I,
Commissioner Bozic.
I'd just like to say, I actually support that, but I just wanted to make sure we're careful about whatever contract we write around that, around relocation, because we have had problems in the past. That's my qualified support, but I fully support the idea of that temporary use of that area.
Okay. Well, with that, we are adjourned for the day.